The PDC World Darts Championship is famed for its drama, but not all of it comes from the oche. Behind the 9 darters and roaring crowds lies a darker side: coughs to distract opponents, beer thrown at champions, trophies snatched on live TV, and players losing their cool in unforgettable ways. Here are the most infamous unsportsmanlike moments in World Championship history. The Alexandra Palace is no stranger to noise, chants, songs, and the odd boo are part of the PDC World Championship atmosphere. But in December 2017, the tournament is played across December divided by January, so this was the 2018 Worlds. A far quieter sound made the loudest headlines: a cough. Justin Pipe, a 46-year-old English pro nicknamed The Force, was locked in a first-round clash against New Zealand's Barney. Smith, who had battled through the international qualifiers to even reach the main draw, had earned himself a chance to topple the seasoned Pipe in a deciding leg. The Ally Pally crowd, thousands strong, was raucous but expectant. And then came the moment that turned darts viral for all the wrong reasons. As Smith lined up what could have been the winning shot, Pipe, standing just a few feet behind, very audibly coughed. On TV, the cough sounded suspiciously timed, cutting through the silence exactly as Smith was preparing to release his dart. Smith missed, went on to lose the leg, and Pipe advanced. At first, some fans thought it was coincidence. After all, people cough. But slow-motion replays circulated online within minutes, and the darts community pounced. The cough, many argued, was no accident. The commentary team noted the odd timing. Pundits on social media called it blatant gamesmanship, and fans began dubbing it Coughgate. The Professional Darts Corporation didn't waste time. The Darts Regulation Authority, DRA, which governs disciplinary matters, launched an official investigation. Pipe was scrutinized not just for the act itself, but for bringing the sport into disrepute on its biggest stage. A week later, the DRA concluded the cough was deliberate. The punishment: a £3,000 fine and a formal warning about his conduct. The story made it beyond darts. UK tabloids ran with headlines mocking Pipe. Mainstream sports outlets debated whether it was cheating, and even casual fans who only tuned in once a year were suddenly talking about the cough that rattled Ally Pally. Pipe's reputation took a heavy hit in a sport where etiquette and sportsmanship are deeply valued. The label of cheat was not easily shaken. To make matters worse, Pipe didn't progress much further in the tournament. His second-round loss rendered the controversy even more bitter. The cough hadn't earned him glory, only notoriety. In hindsight, Coughgate stands out because of its sheer pettiness. Unlike physical fights, walk-offs, or trophy thefts, this was subtle, a tiny act with outsized consequences. Yet it cut to the heart of darts: respect between competitors. On a stage where silence is sacred for the thrower, Pipe had crossed the line, and the sport made an example of him. The 2019 PDC World Championship had promised to showcase darts' expanding global reach. Seigo Asada, known in Japan as the Ninja, had fought his way into the second round and was carrying the hopes of Asian darts fans on his shoulders. Facing him was James Wade, the seasoned Englishman nicknamed The Machine, a multiple major champion known for his clinical finishing and sometimes prickly demeanor. Their second-round clash was tighter than many had expected. Asada played with flair, averaging solidly and keeping Wade under pressure. The Alexandra Palace crowd, always keen to back an underdog, began to warm to the Japanese thrower. Every treble he hit drew cheers. Wade, clearly frustrated by the energy directed against him, seemed to grow more agitated as the match wore on. When Wade finally sealed victory in a deciding set, what should have been a respectful moment turned sour. Instead of a handshake and a dignified celebration, Wade walked aggressively toward Asada, fist pumping directly in his opponent's face. Cameras caught his eyes bulging, his mouth shouting inaudible words, his chest puffed out in a display that felt more like a boxing stare-down than a darts handshake. The real controversy came just minutes later, in his post-match interview with Sky Sports. Asked about his celebrations, Wade said, "I wanted to really hurt him in that last game. I wanted to really hurt him. I'm a winner and I wanted to hurt him. I dug in deep there." The reaction was immediate and brutal. Commentators condemned the remarks as inappropriate and disturbing. Social media erupted with criticism, with fans calling his conduct disgraceful and accusing him of disrespect not just toward Asada, but toward the global audience darts was trying to reach. The PDC was quick to issue a statement saying it would review the comments. Wade, realizing the storm he had unleashed, issued an apology the next day. He explained that he was dealing with bipolar disorder, that his adrenaline had spiked, and that he hadn't meant to threaten physical harm. While some fans accepted the explanation, others insisted it didn't excuse the intimidation on stage or the phrasing used on TV. Seigo Asada himself handled the episode with dignity, refusing to escalate the matter. He simply noted that he respected Wade's ability and was proud of his own performance. For many fans, his humility highlighted the stark contrast between the two men's behavior. The fallout lasted long after the tournament. Wade's reputation, already mixed due to previous controversies in his career, took another dent. The PDC didn't ban him, but the incident was filed firmly in the archives of unsportsmanlike conduct at the World Championship. In retrospect, this wasn't about one angry comment, it was about darts' image. The sport was pushing to expand globally, to show professionalism and sportsmanship to new markets. Instead, one of its biggest names had scared off viewers with a moment that felt ugly and unnecessary. To this day, the Wade outburst remains shorthand for how quickly darts' family-friendly facade can crack. The early 2000s were Phil Taylor's era. By 2002, the Power had already cemented himself as the undisputed king of darts, and his dominance at the PDC World Championship was nearly absolute. That year, in the final, his opponent was Peter Manley, a player who embraced his role as darts' pantomime villain. Known as One Dart for his accuracy on doubles, Manley often used psychological tactics, slow walks, and cheeky grins to wind up opponents and, sometimes, entire crowds. The final, however, was not a contest. Taylor dismantled Manley 7-0 inches, one of the most lopsided World Championship finals ever played. For nearly an hour, Taylor peppered the treble 20 with relentless precision, while Manley could do little more than watch the avalanche of 180 seconds and clinical checkouts. The Ally Pally crowd enjoyed Taylor's brilliance, but they also relished every moment of Manley's visible frustration. When the last dart went in and Taylor was crowned champion yet again, protocol demanded a handshake at the oki, a simple act of sportsmanship that has defined darts for decades. But instead of stepping forward, smiling and congratulating his opponent, Peter Manley turned away. He refused to shake Taylor's hand. The snub was immediate and obvious on television. The Sky Sports cameras caught Taylor extending his hand, waiting, then withdrawing awkwardly as Manley walked off to collect his runner-up check. The audience booed loudly. Commentators branded the behavior petulant and embarrassing. Even fans who enjoyed Manley's villain persona felt he had crossed a line. Taylor himself, though never shy of verbal jousts, kept his composure. In interviews afterward, he admitted he was disappointed but not surprised, given their frosty relationship. Manley and Taylor had clashed many times before, with Taylor openly mocking Manley's antics and Manley insisting Taylor used intimidation of his own. But this moment became the most iconic symbol of their feud. The incident lived on in darts folklore because of what it represented. In a sport built on mutual respect, Manley had made his disdain public. He didn't just lose, he refused to acknowledge the greatness of the man who beat him. For fans, it felt like unsportsmanship of the highest order. In the years that followed, Taylor and Manley continued their rivalry, sometimes exchanging barbs in interviews, sometimes engaging in more subtle on-stage antics. But the 2002 final handshake snub remains the defining flashpoint of their relationship. Even now, 2 decades later, when darts fans talk about poor sportsmanship, this image is one of the first to resurface. Peter Manley walking away, Phil Taylor standing alone, and the crowd jeering the villain who lived up to his name. The 2006 PDC World Championship quarterfinal had all the ingredients of drama before a dart was even thrown. On one side stood Adrian Jackpot Lewis, then just 20 years old, a raw talent already tipped as Phil Taylor's heir apparent. On the other side was Peter Manley, darts' most notorious wind-up merchant, whose reputation for slow play, cheeky grins, and crowd-baiting antics had earned him the role of the sport's pantomime villain. The Alexandra Palace atmosphere was electric. Lewis, a young prodigy, had the crowd's support, but everyone knew Manley's mind games could unsettle even seasoned pros. For Lewis, who was still developing the temperament required at the top level, it would prove too much. From the opening legs, Manley used every psychological trick in his arsenal. He walked slowly back from the oki, lingered near Lewis's eyeline, and made comments under his breath. At one point, Lewis visibly snapped, exchanging words with Manley as the cameras caught the tension bubbling. The game itself was tight, but the bigger battle seemed to be taking place in their body language. Then came the breaking point. Midway through the match, Lewis, visibly fuming, simply downed tools and stormed off the stage. To the shock of commentators and fans alike, he disappeared into the backstage area, leaving Manley standing at the oki with a grin and his hands on his hips. The crowd booed, unsure if the match would even continue. After a lengthy delay, Lewis returned, but the atmosphere was poisoned. He played out the rest of the match, but the focus had shifted entirely to the fallout. Manley, delighted by the disruption, kept his composure and went on to win the tie. The incident quickly became headline news in darts. The PDC fined both players, Lewis for walking off and Manley for conduct deemed unsportsmanlike, but the reputational damage was unequal. For Lewis, it was painted as immaturity proof that, despite his raw talent, he didn't yet have the mental strength for the big stage. For Manley, it only enhanced his image as darts' villain-in-chief, the man who could rattle anyone. Looking back, this quarterfinal is often remembered as Lewis's baptism of fire. He would go on to mature, win back-to-back world championships in 2011 and 2012, and silence critics of his temperament. But in 2006, against the ever-antagonistic Manley, he learned the hardest of lessons. Talent alone wasn't enough if your head went. Few matches in darts history carried the weight of the 2013 World Championship semi-final, Phil Taylor versus Raymond van Barneveld. For years, this had been the sport's defining rivalry, the English Titan versus the Dutch hero. Their 2007 final, in which Barney edged Taylor in a sudden death leg, was legendary. Every subsequent meeting carried echoes of that clash, and this one was no different. The match itself was a spectacle. Taylor and Van Barneveld traded 180 seconds, high checkouts, and roared celebrations. The Ali Pali crowd was split, with Dutch fans chanting Barney Army while English supporters roared for Taylor. The tension rose with every set, and by the end, Taylor had prevailed 6-4 to book his place in yet another World Championship final. Normally, that would be the cue for handshakes and mutual respect. Instead, darts witnessed one of its ugliest post-match incidents. As the players met at the oki, Taylor initially reached for a handshake, but when Van Barneveld grabbed his hand and appeared to pull him closer, perhaps in frustration, perhaps simply overzealous, Taylor exploded. He yanked his hand back, jabbed a finger in Barney's face, and barked angry words inches away from him. The cameras captured it all. Taylor's furious expression, Van Barneveld's confused look, and the officials rushing in to separate the two legends before it escalated further. Sky's commentary team fell silent in shock, while social media instantly buzzed with disbelief. Fans were left asking, had Taylor just tried to fight Barney? In the aftermath, Taylor offered an apology, admitting he had overreacted and misread Van Barneveld's gesture. He explained that he thought Barney had grabbed him too hard, which he interpreted as aggression. Van Barneveld, for his part, appeared hurt and baffled, insisting he had only meant to congratulate his old rival. The PDC issued no formal punishment, but the damage to Taylor's image was real. For years, he had been the sport's dominant figure, fierce, yes, but professional. This outburst painted him in a new light, thin-skinned, aggressive, even disrespectful toward a fellow legend. For Van Barneveld, the incident was heartbreaking. He later admitted it took a toll on their friendship. Darts fans still debate that night. Some argue Taylor's reaction was an honest mistake, a burst of adrenaline in the heat of battle. Others see it as a rare moment when the mask slipped when Taylor, used to absolute control, snapped under the pressure of facing his greatest rival. What's certain is that the 2013 semi-final wasn't remembered only for the quality of darts. It became infamous for the confrontation at the end, two giants of the game, supposed standard bearers for sportsmanship, reduced to a near-physical row on the sport's biggest stage. Michael van Gerwen entered the 2018 PDC World Championship as the undisputed world number one. By then, Mighty Mike had already collected 2 world titles and was in the middle of a run of dominance that made him darts' most intimidating force. The crowd at Alexandra Palace knew they were watching greatness, but greatness doesn't always inspire admiration. Sometimes it attracts resentment. It was the second round, and Van Gerwen was making his way onto the stage for his walk-on. The walk-on is a sacred part of darts. The music blares, the lights flash, and the crowd rises in song and cheer. players bask in it or endure it before stepping up to the oki. For Van Gerwen, this ritual was routine, but that night, it went horribly wrong. As he strode past the crowd, clad in his trademark lime green shirt, a fan leaned forward with a pint of beer and deliberately hurled it over him. In an instant, the liquid-drenched Van Gerwen's shirt, his arms, even his darts case. The cameras caught his stunned expression as he looked down at himself, dripping with lager, his rhythm shattered before he had even thrown a dart. The Ally Pally crowd gasped, then roared in disapproval. Security pounced on the culprit, dragging him out of the arena to boos and chants. The fan, it was later confirmed, was banned for life from attending darts events. For Van Gerwen, though, the damage was done. His carefully honed walk-on routine, part psychology, part preparation, had been thrown into chaos. He had to leave the stage to change into a fresh shirt. Officials quickly scrambled to make sure his darts were wiped clean and dry. Commentators debated whether the attack would rattle him, whether it could give his opponent an unexpected edge. But if the aim was to unsettle him, it backfired spectacularly. Van Gerwen returned minutes later, visibly angry but focused. He went on to win the match with his usual brutal efficiency, brushing aside his opponent and silencing the incident with a dominant performance. In interviews afterward, he downplayed the disruption but admitted it was not nice and something that should never happen in darts. The beer-throwing incident became one of the most notorious crowd-related controversies in World Championship history. Unlike rowdy chants or booing, this was physical interference, a direct assault on a player mid-tournament. The PDC tightened its security procedures afterward, ensuring players had more protection on walk-ons and reinforcing the message that while Ally Pally is known for its party atmosphere, certain lines must never be crossed. Years later, fans still recall the image of MVG drenched in beer, his bright green shirt darkened by lager stains. For all of Van Gerwen's brilliance that season, the beer shower is remembered as the ugliest moment of his campaign, a reminder that even darts' biggest stars aren't safe from the worst behavior of the crowd. The PDC World Championship is a spectacle built on rituals, the roaring crowd, the dramatic walk-ons, and the presentation of the Sid Waddell Trophy, named after the legendary commentator who gave darts its poetic voice. For players, simply being near that trophy is the dream of a lifetime. But in the 2017 final, that sacred symbol of darts was hijacked in one of the strangest and most unsportsmanlike moments in sporting history. The final itself was a blockbuster. Michael Van Gerwen versus Gary Anderson, two titans of the modern era, both multiple-time world champions, locking horns for darts' biggest prize. The stage was set, the trophy gleamed at the front of the oki as always, and millions were watching live on Sky Sports. Then chaos struck. During the early stages of the final, as the players and referees focused on the match, a man suddenly stormed the stage. At first, many thought it was some kind of official or a member of the broadcast crew. But then he walked straight past the players and, to the disbelief of everyone in the building, picked up the Sid Waddell Trophy. The cameras caught it in real time, the intruder raising the trophy high above his head, grinning, as if he had just won the World Championship himself. For a few surreal seconds, the audience didn't know whether to laugh or boo. The commentators shouted in shock. Security raced forward, tackled the man, and wrestled the trophy out of his hands before escorting him off stage. It later emerged that the stage invader was part of Troll Station, a YouTube prank group infamous for disruptive stunts. Their goal was simple: hijack live events to gain viral attention. In this case, they had chosen darts' most sacred stage and its most sacred object to pull off their stunt. The fallout was furious. The PDC condemned the intrusion, and questions were immediately raised about security. How had a fan managed to get on stage during the sport's most important match? What if the intruder had damaged the trophy, or worse, gone after one of the players? Fans and pundits alike demanded answers. For Van Gerwen and Anderson, the incident was a bizarre distraction. Both men tried to laugh it off afterward, but the invasion undeniably disrupted the flow of the final. Anderson later admitted that he couldn't believe it, and that the stunt had momentarily broken his concentration. Van Gerwen, who went on to win the match and lift the real trophy legitimately, shrugged it off with his trademark confidence, but he too acknowledged that the intrusion was dangerous and unacceptable. The stage invasion remains one of the strangest episodes in World Championship history. Unlike Coughgate or slow play controversies, this wasn't about players crossing the line, it was about an outsider desecrating the sanctity of the stage. For fans, the image of a random prankster hoisting the Sid Waddell trophy will forever be burned into memory, a bizarre mix of comedy and outrage that showed how vulnerable even the sport's biggest night can be to chaos. The 2023 PDC World Championship quarterfinal was supposed to be business as usual for Gerwyn Price, world number 1 and former rugby pro turned darts powerhouse. By then, Price had already cemented himself as one of the most polarizing figures in darts. His aggressive celebrations, the chest thumps, the primal roars had won him fans, but also a legion of detractors. At Alexandra Palace, the boos often started before he even threw a dart. On this particular night, the hostility was deafening. Every time Price stepped forward, chants echoed through Ali Pali, jeers, mocking songs, and relentless attempts to break his focus. The Welshman had long argued that the booing was unfair, that it diminished the sport. But in this match, he decided to fight back in a way no one had ever seen before. Midway through the contest against Germany's Gabriel Clemens, Price returned from a break wearing giant industrial-style ear defenders. The bright blue defenders covered his entire head, looking more suited for a construction site than a dart stage. The crowd roared with laughter and disbelief. The commentators were stunned. Never before had a player gone to such lengths to block out Ali Pali's noise. Price played a few legs wearing them, at one point theatrically cupping his hand to his ear as if to taunt the crowd, asking, "Can't hear you now, can I?" The move, intended to be defiant, became a spectacle of its own. Social media exploded. Clips of Price in the ear defenders went viral instantly, with fans debating whether it was genius, ridiculous, or just plain unsportsmanlike. The problem was, it didn't work. Price's game faltered, his focus seemingly thrown off by the very equipment meant to protect him. He looked uncomfortable at the oche, fiddling with the defenders, then eventually ditching them for smaller in-ear plugs. By then, however, his rhythm was gone. Clemens seized the moment and marched to a shock victory, knocking out the world number 1. The fallout was huge. Commentators called the ear defenders the strangest sight ever seen on a dart stage. Fans argued over whether the crowd's behavior had pushed Price too far, or whether his own theatrics had backfired. The PDC confirmed afterward that while players are allowed to wear hearing protection, Price's oversized defenders would not be permitted in future tournaments. For Price, it was a night that crystallized his role as darts' ultimate lightning rod. To his supporters, the ear defenders were a brave stand against toxic crowds. To his critics, it was another example of him over-dramatizing and making himself the story. Either way, the image of Gerwyn Price, a world champion reduced to wearing ear defenders on dart's grandest stage, became one of the most unforgettable moments in World Championship history. If there's one thing Gerwyn Price has never been accused of, it's holding his tongue. The Welshman thrives on confrontation, feeding off controversy as much as he feeds off 180s. That combustible personality was on full display during the 2019 World Championship, in a third-round clash with Australia's Simon Whitlock. Whitlock, known as the Wizard for both his nickname and his elaborate flowing beard, was a respected veteran of the game, but one thing about his style divided opinion: his methodical pace. Whitlock took his time measuring, composing, double-checking his stance before each throw. Against some opponents, it was no issue. Against Price, it was a spark waiting to ignite. The match was tense, grinding into a deciding set. Price, visibly agitated, was pacing the stage between throws, shaking his head, muttering to himself, and glaring at Whitlock. Each time Whitlock slowed the game down, Price seemed to bristle further. The crowd, sensing the drama, amped up their noise, adding to the tension. When Price finally clinched victory, instead of celebrating the win, he went straight into attack mode. In his post-match interview, he didn't hold back. That was pathetic, absolutely pathetic. The way he played, the pace of that game, it was awful. The bluntness shocked even seasoned darts fans. It wasn't just criticism, it was a direct public humiliation of his opponent. Whitlock, for his part, remained calm, refusing to escalate the row. But fans and pundits were furious at the lack of respect. Many argued that slow play was simply part of the sport, and that Price had crossed the line by airing his grievances so aggressively on live television. The PDC didn't formally punish Price, but the incident added fuel to the growing perception of him as darts' villain. In the months that followed, crowds booed him more, commentators debated his sportsmanship, and players braced themselves for his mind games. For Price, the pathetic outburst was another brick in the wall of his controversial reputation. What's fascinating, looking back, is how this incident foreshadowed later blow-ups, including his ear defender's stunt in 2023. The slow play complaint wasn't just about Whitlock, it was about Price's ongoing battle with patience, perception, and provocation. In a way, Whitlock's calm response made the moment even more powerful. By refusing to engage, he left Price looking like the one who lost his cool, even in victory. And for fans, the interview line lives on, 2 words absolutely pathetic that captured Price's fiery personality better than any roar or fist pump ever could. Gary Anderson is known as one of darts' most naturally gifted players. Smooth throw, no-frills attitude, a 2-time world champion loved by fans for his laid-back Scottish charm. But in the 2020 World Championship, that calm exterior cracked, and it all came down to one thing: pace. His third-round opponent was Mensur Suljovic, the Austrian known as the Gentle. The nickname was misleading. Suljovic's game was anything but gentle. His deliberate, methodical pace was infamous. He would pause, reposition, take deep breaths, and sometimes step away from the oki entirely before throwing. Against some players, this slow burn style was merely frustrating. Against Anderson, who thrived on rhythm, it was infuriating. From the very first set, Anderson looked uncomfortable. He was walking back from the oki, shaking his head, muttering under his breath, glaring at Suljovic as the Austrian took what felt like an eternity to throw. The crowd began to notice too, groaning audibly at the glacial pace of play. The tension boiled over as the match wore on. Anderson fidgeted, rolled his eyes, and at one point, openly complained to the referee, but Suljovic didn't break stride. If anything, his slow play seemed to intensify as the pressure mounted. By the deciding set, Anderson was visibly unraveled. He eventually ground out the win, but instead of relief, he looked drained, frustrated, even angry. Then came the post-match interview, and the moment that turned this into a full-blown controversy. Anderson didn't mince his words. "I've had enough of this. I'm done. If this is darts now, I don't want to be part of it." The comments shocked fans. Here was one of the sport's greats, a 2-time world champion, openly threatening to walk away from the game. His anger wasn't just about Suljovic's tactics, it was about what Anderson saw as the deterioration of darts' spirit, where gamesmanship was replacing competition. The fallout was intense. Fans debated fiercely. Was Suljovic guilty of deliberate time wasting, or was Anderson simply too easily rattled? Some accused Anderson of hypocrisy, pointing out that slow play had long been part of darts and that great champions had always found ways to adapt. Others sympathized, arguing that Suljovic's antics pushed the limits of what should be allowed on stage. For Anderson, the row became a defining, late-career moment. Though he didn't quit, the incident highlighted his growing frustration with the modern game, with the mind games, the pace disputes, and the ever-rowdier alley-pally crowds. While he went on to remain competitive, many fans point to 2020 as the year Anderson's love for the sport truly began to wane. Few athletes get to script the ending to their careers. For Phil Taylor, the most decorated darts player in history, the 2018 World Championship final was meant to be his swan song. A chance to walk off the Ally Pally stage one last time, perhaps with a 17th world title in hand, cementing his legacy with a storybook ending. Instead, it became memorable for all the wrong reasons. Taylor, then 57, had announced 2018 would be his final year. Every match of the tournament carried a sense of history, the last time fans would see the power in action on the world stage. Against the young, fearless Rob Cross, a former electrician making his debut in the World Championship final, most expected Taylor's experience to shine through. But the match was a rout. Cross, playing with astonishing composure, demolished Taylor 7-2, averaging over 107 and hitting checkout after checkout with ruthless precision. It wasn't just a defeat, it was a dismantling. Taylor, visibly frustrated, tried to keep his composure, but the signs of irritation grew with every leg lost. Then came the infamous moment. Cameras caught Taylor as he turned back toward the crowd after a poor visit, raising his middle finger. It was quick, but unmistakable. A flash of anger, a breaking of the mask. For a man who had spent decades portraying himself as the consummate professional, fierce, yes, but respectful, it was a jarring sight. The gesture spread quickly across social media. Commentators debated whether it was directed at heckling fans, at himself, or at the sheer frustration of being outplayed. But the damage was done. Headlines didn't just read, "Rob Cross stuns Phil Taylor." They included references to Taylor's middle finger farewell. After the match, Taylor downplayed the gesture and tried to keep the focus on Cross, whom he praised for a fantastic performance. But fans were split. Some excused it as a human moment from a legend struggling with the weight of retirement. Others saw it as an unsportsmanlike stain on what should have been a dignified exit. In hindsight, the gesture encapsulated the moment perfectly. Taylor, the ultimate competitor, couldn't bear the thought of bowing out quietly. Even in his final match, his emotions boiled over. While his legacy as the greatest of all time remains untouched, his farewell was forever marked not just by defeat, but by a raised middle finger, a symbol of frustration, defiance, and the imperfect humanity of a sporting icon.